Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a special request today. One of you wanted us to dig into Originals, that amazing book by Adam Grant.
Yeah, originals. How non-conformists move the world. A fascinating look at what it takes to really shake things up and, make a difference.
And we're lucky enough to have the 1-hour guide by Anil Nathu to help us unpack it all.
It's such a great resource. It boils down all the key ideas so we can really get to the heart of it. You know what makes this stuff tick.
Exactly.
Uh,
But we're going beyond just this, what we're diving into the why. Why does this matter? Like, how can you, listening right now, actually use these ideas to be more original?
Love that because it's not just theory, right? It's about taking action, making those original ideas happen.
Okay, so Grant kicks things off with this idea of creative destruction. It's like, think about it. What if smartphones never happened?
Or even something simpler. Imagine no Post-it notes.
I mean, can you even picture that? They're everywhere. But the 1-hour guide by Neil Nathu points out that the Post-it note was almost a failure.
Totally. It was meant to be a super strong adhesive, but it ended up weak. And luckily, someone saw the potential for something completely different.
A perfect example of how sometimes the failures lead to the most brilliant breakthroughs.
And it goes way beyond sticky notes. Think about Kodak. They actually invented the digital camera.
No way. Seriously.
Yeah. But they hesitated. They were so focused on film that they missed the boat on this revolutionary technology.
That's got to be one of the biggest what-ifs
Well,
in business history.
Definitely. It's a prime example of how clinging to the old ways can backfire, big time. When something new and innovative comes along, sometimes you got to be willing to let go of what's familiar.
Embrace the disruption.
Exactly, because those who adapt and innovate are the ones who thrive.
Okay, so we've got this creative destruction happening all around us. But how do we know a genuinely original idea when we see one? Are we kind of wired to miss the next big thing?
It's a great question and something that Grant digs into in Originals. He talks about how even the most brilliant minds can have blind spots.
It's like we get stuck in our own ways of thinking.
Right. Think about the Wright brothers. Imagine pitching the idea of a flying machine back then. People probably thought they were crazy.
I bet they did. But they had this incredible vision, this unwavering belief in what seemed impossible to everyone else.
And that's the thing about originality. It often requires going against the grain, trusting your gut, even when the world tells you you're wrong.
Like Steve Jobs with the graphical user interface, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thought he was nuts, but he saw the potential before anyone else did.
And George Lucas with Star Wars? Talk about a crazy idea that no one thought would work. But it goes both ways. Sometimes that intuition can lead us down the wrong path.
Totally. Like when Xerox basically invented the personal computer but didn't see its potential.
That's a classic example of what's called confirmation bias. We tend to favor information that supports our existing beliefs, even when those beliefs are holding us back.
So it's like we need to be open to new ideas, even those that challenge our assumptions.
Exactly. Challenge those assumptions. Actively seek out diverse perspectives. Don't let yourself get trapped in an echo chamber of your own beliefs.
It makes you wonder how many potentially brilliant ideas have been dismissed simply because they didn't fit the prevailing paradigm.
It's a reminder to stay curious, to be open to the unexpected, to embrace those moments when someone says, hey, what if we tried this completely different approach?
Now, we've got these potentially amazing ideas brewing, but what about the guts to actually speak up? Especially when it means challenging the norm or going against those in charge. Have you ever been in that situation where you had a great idea, but you were just too nervous to share it? I know I have.
Totally. I mean, it can be scary, right? But that's what Grant calls speaking truth to power. And he argues that it's absolutely essential for driving progress. And, the 1-hour guide by Anil Nathu really emphasizes that too.
He uses some powerful examples too, like Robert F. Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. While everyone else was pushing for military action, RFK spoke up, advocating for diplomacy. And it might have actually prevented nuclear war.
It's incredible to think about the impact of that one voice, that one act of courage to challenge the prevailing view.
Makes you think about all the times when those dissenting voices are silenced, like the whistleblowers at Enron.
Right. If their concerns had been taken seriously, maybe that whole scandal could have been prevented.
It's a stark reminder of how important it is to create environments where people feel safe to speak their minds, to share their ideas, even if they challenge the status quo.
Exactly. Psychological safety is a huge part of that. It's about fostering a culture where people feel comfortable voicing their concerns without fear of getting shut down or penalized.
Like that culture of safety they have in aviation. where pilots are encouraged to report anything that seems off no matter how small. It's led to a massive improvement in safety records.
It's such a powerful analogy, and it connects to what Grant calls inclusive leadership. Surrounding yourself with people who have different viewpoints, who will challenge your assumptions, who will push you to think differently. Think about Lincoln building his team of rivals.
Or Satya Nadella transforming Microsoft by embracing diversity of thought. It's not about surrounding yourself with yes men, right? It's about valuing those dissenting voices, those different perspectives, even if they make you uncomfortable.
Precisely, because that discomfort, that friction, can lead to some of the most groundbreaking innovations.
Okay, we've talked about creative destruction, spotting those original ideas, speaking truth to power. But what about timing? Have you ever jumped into something head first, only to realize later that maybe it wasn't the right moment?
Oh, all the time. And Grant talks about this in Originals. He introduces this fascinating concept called the first mover disadvantage.
The first mover disadvantage. So it's not always about being the first one out of the gate.
Not necessarily. Sometimes it's actually better to be a little late to the party.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, take Apple's Newton, for example. It was a groundbreaking handheld device, but it was way ahead of its time. The market just wasn't ready for it, and it flopped.
And then years later, the iPhone came along, right?
Exactly. Perfect timing, and it revolutionized everything. Sometimes it pays to observe, gather information, and wait for the right moment.
So it's like that saying, timing is everything.
Exactly. Grant argues that strategic procrastination can be incredibly valuable. It's not about laziness, it's about calculated waiting and observation.
So instead of rushing into things, we should be thinking strategically about when to act and when to hold back.
Exactly, like Mark Zuckerberg's measured approach to expanding Facebook.
Or the emergence of Slack, which started as a side project within a gaming company. Patience and adaptability are key.
Absolutely. And the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu does a great job of bringing these concepts to life with those kinds of examples. It makes it so much easier to understand and apply to our own lives.
It's not just theory. It's about giving you those aha moments where you think, oh, I can actually use this.
Exactly. Because that's the ultimate goal, right? To take these ideas and actually make something amazing happen.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. Creative destruction, spotting those original ideas, speaking truth to power, and timing. But there's another piece of the puzzle that's just as important. Building and maintaining those powerful coalitions that can really drive change. Think back to a time when you achieved something truly remarkable as part of a group. What made that group work so well together?
That's what Grant explores in Originals, and it's so relevant, whether you're starting a business, leading a team, or even just trying to make a difference in your community.
Because we can achieve so much more together than we ever could alone.
Right.
But it's not just about gathering a crowd.
Right. It's about building a coalition that's strong, focused, and resilient. And the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu really breaks down how to do that.
And Grant uses these really powerful examples, like the Civil Rights Movement and the Paris Agreement, to illustrate the incredible power of collective action.
I mean, those monumental shifts simply wouldn't have been possible without people coming together, uniting behind a shared vision.
But it's not just about gathering a massive crowd. It's about building a coalition that's strong, focused, and resilient.
It's like that Goldilocks principle. The coalition needs to be just the right size, not too big or too small.
Right, not too hot, not too cold. It needs that sweet spot where everyone can effectively contribute and stay focused on the mission.
Exactly. And it needs to be adaptable, able to navigate challenges and stay united even when disagreements arise.
Because disagreements are inevitable, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you've got people from different backgrounds and perspectives coming together.
Absolutely. And that's where strong leadership comes in. It's about creating a space where those disagreements can be productive, where they can lead to better solutions.
And Grant highlights this brilliant Trojan horse strategy. It's about subtly introducing your ideas almost under the radar and gradually gaining acceptance.
Like the open source movement embedding their code within proprietary systems, or Airbnb disrupting the hotel industry by starting with simple room rentals. It's about overcoming initial resistance by starting small and building momentum over time.
It's a clever way to bypass those initial roadblocks and pave the way for something truly innovative.
But of course, building the coalition is just the first step. The real challenge lies in maintaining it over time.
It's like a long-term relationship. It requires constant effort, open communication, compromise, and a willingness to adapt as circumstances evolve.
And Grant highlights examples like NATO and the African Union, coalitions that have managed to stay relevant for decades.
That's impressive. What's their secret?
They've done it through constant adaptation, evolving to meet new challenges, and finding ways to stay united despite those inevitable differences in perspective. It's a reminder that those strong alliances require ongoing work.
A commitment to the shared vision, and a willingness to work through those inevitable disagreements that arise along the way. So we've covered creative destruction, recognizing original ideas, speaking truth to power, timing, and building coalitions. But where does that originality actually come from in the first place? What shapes our ability to think differently and challenge those norms?
That's where Chapter 6 of Originals takes us. It's a really fascinating look at how our families, our siblings, our parents, even our mentors play a huge role in shaping our creative potential.
And it starts with a super thought-provoking question. How has your family shaped your way of thinking? Your siblings, your parents. It immediately makes you reflect on those early influences, those formative experiences that shape who we become.
Right. And Grant contrasts the collaborative dynamic of the Wright brothers with the competitive rivalry of the Van Gogh brothers, showing how different sibling relationships can foster different kinds of creativity. It's a reminder that our families play a huge role in shaping our individual approaches to the world.
And then he digs into parental influence, attributing part of the Beatles' success to their parents' unwavering support of their musical passions.
And of course, there's Elon Musk, his multidisciplinary approach to innovation. It can be traced back to his parents' diverse backgrounds and their encouragement to explore different fields.
It makes you realize how important it is to have those supportive figures in our lives, those people who encourage us to explore our interests, to challenge our assumptions, and most importantly, to believe in our own potential.
Mentorship is huge, too. Grant talks about Einstein's relationship with Max Telmet, who introduced him to advanced math and science.
And Oprah Winfrey's connection with Maya Angelou, who is such an incredible mentor and inspiration to her.
Exactly. And it's not just about individuals, it's about creating environments that nurture originality. Think about the Montessori method, which emphasizes self-directed learning.
Or Google's famous 20% time policy, which allows employees to dedicate a portion of their time to pursuing personal projects. It's about creating those spaces where exploration and experimentation are welcomed, where failure is seen as a learning opportunity, and where individuals are empowered to push their own boundaries.
And that leads us perfectly into Chapter 7, where Grant tackles this concept of groupthink, which he calls a silent killer of originality. He asks the question that I think we can all relate to. Have you ever been in a group where everyone seemed to agree, but you had this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right?
Oh yeah, totally. It's that feeling of going along with the crowd, even when your gut is telling you something's off. And as Grant points out, it can have some pretty disastrous consequences.
He uses some really powerful examples to illustrate that, like the Challenger disaster and the collapse of Enron.
In both cases, you had dissenting voices that were tragically silenced, and it ultimately led to catastrophe.
It's a sobering reminder that even the most brilliant minds can make terrible decisions when groupthink takes over.
So we need to be really vigilant, right? To question assumptions, even when everyone else seems to be on board. It's about fostering a culture of constructive dissent, where challenging the status quo is seen as a valuable contribution, not as an act of defiance.
Grant actually challenges this myth of strong cultures. He argues that while a shared vision is important, overly strong cultures can stifle dissent and prevent new ideas from taking root.
So it's about finding that balance, right?
Exactly, between shared values and the freedom to challenge assumptions, to push back when you see something that could be done better.
And Grant highlights the importance of having a devil's advocate in the room.
Yeah, like how JFK relied on his brother Robert to play that role during the Cuban Missile Crisis. It forced them to challenge their assumptions and consider alternatives, which ultimately led to a more peaceful resolution.
And then there's Pixar's Brain Trust, where colleagues provide really honest, sometimes brutally honest, feedback on each other's work.
Not to tear each other down, but to make the work better, and they've produced some of the most beloved animated films of all time.
It's about actively seeking out those dissenting opinions, not to shut them down, but to ensure that you're considering all angles.
Grant highlights a few really practical ways to do that, like Google's Dory platform, where employees can ask questions and share feedback anonymously.
And the military's practice of red teaming, where they have a dedicated team whose job is to challenge plans and strategies and identify potential weaknesses. It's about proactively seeking out those different perspectives.
Because sometimes the best ideas come from the people who are willing to say, hey, wait a minute, what if we're wrong about this?
So we're learning to be more original, to speak up, to build those powerful coalitions and to avoid groupthink. But what about the emotional roller coaster that inevitably comes with all of this? The fear, the doubt, the excitement, the uncertainty. I mean, it can be pretty overwhelming.
That's what Grant tackles in Chapter 8, and it's something that anyone who's trying to make a change will resonate with, whether you're starting a business, pitching a new idea, or even just trying to make a difference in your community.
Because, let's be honest, putting yourself out there can be scary.
Totally. And Grant acknowledges that anxiety is a natural response to these situations. It's how we deal with that anxiety that matters.
So how do we deal with it? How do we channel that nervous energy into something productive?
Well, Grant talks about reframing anxiety as excitement. It's about shifting our perspective, seeing that nervous energy as fuel that can actually propel us forward.
I love that. It's about taking that fear and using it to our advantage.
Exactly. He uses the example of Steve Jobs returning to Apple. The company was on the brink of collapse, but he managed to rally everyone to inspire them with his vision.
And then there's Elon Musk with SpaceX. I mean, talk about facing seemingly impossible odds.
Right. But he persevered through multiple rocket failures near bankruptcy, all because he had this unwavering belief in his vision. It's about finding that inner strength to push forward even when things get tough.
It's like that quote, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
Love it. And it's not just about managing anxiety. Grant also talks about overcoming apathy, which can happen when we lose sight of our purpose, when we feel disconnected from our work or our goals.
Like we're just going through the motions, we've lost that spark.
Exactly. And he uses the example of Howard Schultz stepping back from Starbucks to rediscover his passion, or IBM's turnaround under Lou Gerstner. It's about recognizing when we've become complacent and taking steps to reconnect with what truly motivates us.
It's about asking ourselves, why am I doing this? What am I passionate about?
Right. And then there's ambivalence, that feeling of being unsure or having mixed emotions about something, especially when it comes to change. It's completely natural to feel that way.
Especially when we're stepping outside of our comfort zones.
Exactly. And Grant uses some great examples here, too, like Netflix's transition to streaming, which was a huge gamble at the time, and Alan Mullally's success in unifying Ford with a shared vision.
It's about recognizing those feelings of ambivalence, acknowledging them, and then finding ways to move forward with clarity and purpose.
And finally, Grant addresses anger. It's a powerful emotion that can be destructive if not channeled properly, but it can also be a catalyst for positive change.
It's like that saying, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference.
Right. And Grant highlights Nelson Mandela's approach to dismantling apartheid in South Africa. He managed to transform anger into a force for reconciliation and progress.
It's about acknowledging that anger, understanding its root cause, and then finding constructive ways to channel it into positive action.
And he uses Facebook's response to privacy concerns as another example. They had to address the anger of their users to regain trust and rebuild their reputation. It's a reminder that even negative emotions can be harnessed for positive change if we approach them with awareness and intention.
So we've reached the end of part 1 of our deep dive into originals, with a little help from the 1-Hour Guide by Anil Nathu. We've been exploring the minds of those nonconformists who dare to think differently and challenge the status quo, and we've only just scratched the surface.
It's funny, isn't it? We talk about being original, but what does that even mean? It's like we all have this idea of like a rebel or a maverick.
Yeah, like someone who's always bucking the system.
Yeah.
But Grant and, the 1-Hour Guide by Anil Nathu, too, they paint a much more nuanced picture.
Right. It's not just about being different for the sake of being different. It's about having a purpose, a reason for challenging the norm.
Like a rebel with a cause.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important distinction because it's easy to get caught up in the idea of being disruptive or unconventional.
But if there's no substance behind it, it's just noise.
Exactly. It's like those people who are always trying to be the loudest voice in the room, but they don't actually have anything meaningful to say.
So it's not just about standing out, it's about standing for something.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. Because when you have a purpose, a cause that you're passionate about, that's when true originality emerges.
So how do we find that purpose? How do we tap into that deeper motivation that drives us to make a difference?
That's a question that Grant explores in depth in Originals, and it's not always an easy answer.
It's a journey, right? It's about self-discovery. about exploring our values, our passions, the things that really light us up.
And it's also about being willing to step outside of our comfort zones, to challenge our assumptions, to embrace those moments of discomfort that often lead to growth.
Because that's where the magic happens, right? When we're pushing ourselves, we're learning, we're evolving.
And that's where those original ideas start to emerge, when we're open to new experiences, new perspectives, new ways of thinking.
Okay, so we've talked about the why behind originality, but let's get practical. What are some tangible steps we can take to cultivate more original thinking in our own lives?
Uh-huh.
The 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu gives some really concrete advice.
Absolutely. And one of the most surprising pieces of advice is to embrace doubt.
Doubt. Isn't that kind of the opposite of what we want? Wouldn't we rather be confident in our ideas?
That's what I thought too. But Grant makes this really interesting distinction between self-doubt and idea doubt.
Okay, I'm listening. What's the difference?
Self-doubt is the kind that paralyzes us. It makes us question our abilities. It holds us back from taking action.
Yeah, that's the kind of doubt we definitely want to avoid.
Right. But idea doubt, on the other hand, is actually incredibly productive. It's about questioning our assumptions, testing our ideas, making sure they're really solid.
So instead of getting stuck in that cycle of, what if I'm not good enough?
Mm.
We should be asking, what if this idea isn't good enough?
Exactly. It's about approaching our ideas with a critical eye, not to tear them down, but to make them stronger, more resilient, more impactful.
So how do we do that? How do we get better at questioning our own ideas in a constructive way?
Grant suggests a few really practical things. One is to simply ask more questions. Instead of just accepting our ideas at face value, we need to probe them, to turn them over in our minds.
Like playing devil's advocate with ourselves.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what if we tried this instead? Is there a better way to achieve this goal? What are the potential downsides of this approach?
And it's not just about questioning our own ideas. It's about seeking out diverse perspectives from others.
Totally, because sometimes we're just too close to our own ideas to see them objectively.
So it's about talking to people from different backgrounds with different experiences and ways of thinking.
Exactly. And it can be uncomfortable sometimes, especially when you're getting feedback that challenges your assumptions.
But that discomfort is a good sign, right?
Yep.
It means you're stretching yourself, you're growing.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to surround yourself with people who will challenge you, who will push you to think differently. That kind of friction can be incredibly creative.
And Grant also talks about the importance of generating a large volume of ideas, even if most of them are, as he puts it, bad.
It's like that old saying, you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find a prince. The more ideas you generate, the more likely you are to stumble upon something truly original and brilliant.
So it's about embracing that quantity over quality approach in the early stages of brainstorming.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And once you have a good number of ideas, you can start to refine them, to combine them, to build on each other's ideas.
And that's where collaboration becomes so powerful, right? When you have a group of people working together, bouncing ideas off each other.
Totally. And Grant encourages us to steal like an artist.
Now, hold on. Isn't that encouraging plagiarism?
Not at all. It's about recognizing that all creative work is inspired by something that came before.
So it's about taking those influences, those ideas that resonate with us, and then adding our own unique twist.
Exactly. It's about making those ideas our own, transforming them into something new and original.
So it's not about copying. It's about being inspired.
Right. It's about letting those external influences spark our own creativity.
Mm.
And finally, Grant emphasizes the importance of experimentation.
Trying things out, seeing what works, learning from our mistakes.
Exactly. It's about embracing that growth mindset, that understanding that failure is not the opposite of success, but rather a crucial part of the journey.
So to sum it up, if we want to cultivate more originality in our lives, the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu suggests embracing idea doubt, asking more questions, seeking out diverse perspectives, generating lots of ideas, stealing like an artist, experimenting fearlessly, and most importantly, having fun along the way.
That's a fantastic summary. And remember, if you're looking to dive deeper into these concepts, the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu is a fantastic resource. It's packed with actionable insights and practical tips.
And remember, originality is not a destination, it's a journey. It's about constantly pushing ourselves to think differently, to challenge assumptions, and to find new ways to create value in the world.
And who knows, maybe someday we'll be doing a deep dive on your original ideas.
Now, that would be awesome. But even if we don't, the world will be a better place for your unique contributions.
So go out there and make something amazing. We believe in you.
We do. But before we get too carried away, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. The purpose behind originality. What drives us to make a difference? We're back and ready to dive into the final part of our exploration of originals. We've talked about creative destruction, spotting those game-changing ideas, the importance of speaking up, timing, building coalitions, even where originality comes from. But there's one more layer we need to explore, and the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu really highlights this. It's like, what's the driving force behind it all?
The purpose, right? Like, it's one thing to be different, to go against the grain, but it's something else entirely to be a true original, to make a meaningful impact.
Exactly. So it's not enough to just be a rebel. You got to have a cause, something you're fighting for, something bigger than yourself.
That's what Grant calls being a rebel with a cause. And I think that's such a powerful concept because it's about channeling that nonconformist energy, that desire to challenge the status quo into something that really matters.
So how do we find that cause? What are the things that we're truly passionate about? The things that light us up and make us want to make a difference?
It's a journey for sure. And it starts with self-awareness. Taking the time to reflect on our values, our beliefs, the things that we care about most deeply.
And being honest with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like really digging deep and figuring out what drives us.
Exactly. And sometimes it involves stepping outside our comfort zones, trying new things, exposing ourselves to different perspectives. Because it's often in those moments of discomfort, those moments when we're challenged, that we discover what truly resonates with us.
And once we've found that cause, that purpose that we're passionate about, that's when the real work begins, right?
Absolutely. Because it's one thing to have a belief, it's another thing to act on it. To stand up for what you believe in, even when it's difficult.
And that takes courage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially when we're talking about speaking truth to power, challenging those norms, pushing back against the status quo.
It can be intimidating. But history is full of examples of people who did just that. People who dared to speak up, even when it was risky, even when they faced opposition.
Think about people like Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Malala Yousafzai. They all faced incredible challenges, even threats to their lives, but they refused to be silenced.
And their courage inspired countless others to join their movements, to demand change, to create a better world. It's a powerful reminder that one voice, one act of courage, can have a ripple effect.
And it's not just about those huge historical figures. It's about all of us in our own lives, finding those moments where we can speak up, where we can make a difference.
Whether it's raising a concern at work, advocating for a cause we believe in, or simply refusing to participate in something that feels wrong. It's about having the integrity to stand up for our values, even when it's uncomfortable.
But that takes practice. It's like a muscle we have to build. How do we get better at speaking truth to power?
Grant talks about developing our moral muscle. That ability to make tough decisions, to stand firm in our convictions, even when it's hard. And it starts with small acts of courage. Taking those little risks, challenging ourselves to step outside our comfort zones.
And surrounding ourselves with people who support us, who encourage us to be our best selves.
Exactly. It's about finding those mentors, those allies who will help us stay true to our principles even when it's difficult.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into originals, with all the amazing insights from the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu, what are the key takeaways? What do we want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is that originality is not some special talent that only a few people possess. It's a skill we can all cultivate with practice and intention.
It's about embracing that nonconformist spirit, that willingness to challenge the status quo and to find new and better ways of doing things.
And it's about finding our purpose, that driving force that motivates us to make a difference in the world.
So if there's one thing we hope you take away from this deep dive, it's this. Don't be afraid to be an original. Embrace that unique perspective, that creative spark that's within you. The world needs your ideas, your passion, your willingness to make things better. And if you're looking for a little guidance on that journey, be sure to check out the 1 Hour Guide by Anil Nathu. It's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to unlock their own potential for originality. And that's it for our deep dive into originals. Thank you for joining us. And remember, visit the 1 Hour Guide website for more business insights by Anil Nathu.